So tell me about your experience with experimentation. And then we're going to look at a scenario of how you might increase retention at a streaming service like Netflix or Disney Plus.
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking. So yeah, in my current role, I lead a team that does a lot of experimentation, and we use it primarily as a tool to move some metric forward. For us, it's a lot of about conversion. I currently work at a real estate portal, and we have a lot of people who visit that site. The same could be said of e-commerce or other online places where you want people to do something on the site and you have different ideas of how you can do it. And experiments help you have more conviction in what you're doing, moving a metric, moving the business forward. I've often been surprised at what I think will happen versus what actually happens. And just using intuition isn't enough. So that's the main way I think we use, I assume you're talking about A/B experimentation. Is that right?
Yeah, it could be A/B experimentation. It could be product experimentation, kind of however, whatever works in your past that you've done before. Um, you talked about learning, right? And some ideas how you think it might be one way, and then it comes out it's very different than what you thought it might be. But when you look at a product roadmap, right? How do you decide what actually warrants an experiment versus those things that should just be done and just get it done?
Yeah, I think of return on investment. I think of the effort and the return. There are some things on the roadmap that are just faster and easier to just run as experiments. And there are some that are risky to do without. So let me just talk about each one.
Sure.
So, there are some things that are hard to measure the impact of without running an experiment, like changing words on a button, moving a button on a page, changing colors, like those things, like we can all come up with what we think is right. And we may all be partially right and partially wrong because each individual change might improve or not improve how well the web page performs, like conversion. And experiments there are a great tool to sort of clarify and say, look, we don't have to argue. We don't have to use opinions. We can just use data. The other tool or the other opportunity when I look at a product roadmap is risk. It's like, wait, if we are about to introduce something new, what if it tanks some performance of our website or our app or our product? That will be bad. And we may not know that it is this thing we're adding or subtracting that's causing the problem. And so in both cases, it sort of gives you that conviction. Uh, and, and that's where I would use experiments. I would not use experiments, by the way, all the time. Like you do, I think as a product manager, you need to have conviction on what you're doing, where you're heading. And there are some things that just don't lend themselves well to experimentation. And it is not a hammer and nail where it's like everything has to be hit by this hammer called experiments, but it has its place. It is an example of what I wouldn't do necessarily as an experiment. A new 0 to 1 exploratory AI based chat experience, like that matters less. A/B testing and measure. What matters more is let's observe what users are doing. Let's learn. It's very early stage. It's speculative. There, the value is more. Let's talk to people. Let's learn. The value is less. Let's look at metrics. Let's look at statistical significance. That matters a lot less.
Gotcha. No, I really appreciate that. So, in your opinion, what would you say is the biggest single mistake that product teams make when they're trying to be really data driven through their experiments? Right? What do you see as some of the downfall to that?
With the experiments themselves, or just like in trying to be like living that
Trying
philosophy,
to
or
live
both?
that philosophy or ethos, right? We're going to drive experiments to get data to then make decisions, right?
Uh, Got it. One big problem I've observed is PMs are not grounded on the problem they're trying to solve. Like they jump to solutions and they think, oh, I can use experiments to test things, move things around on the page and see what happens. And without a good grounding on what problem are we really trying to solve, and then how then might we solve it, and why? Like, what is a user problem, not the business problem, not the product problem, but like what is the solution? What is the thing? Sorry, the problem for the user. Um, then it just becomes a bit of a dart game, right? It's like, well, let's just randomly generate 10 ideas and see what happens. Um, that could work, but it can be very defocused. So it's really important, and this is a general product thing, right? Not just for experimentation. It's like just be really grounded in the problem you're solving. Um, the other thing I've seen to kind of move to the other part of, I guess, the process, well after running an experiment, sometimes PMs get paralyzed with like, well, the data aren't very clear. Like sometimes we have like some metric is going up and some metric is going down, and PMs don't feel like they can use some intuition and some judgment in combination with data to make a call, and they feel frozen. And I think I think it's important that, it's a the data, the results of an A/B experiment that you're seeing are a tool. They're an input, but they're not the only thing. I think there's a famous Jeff Bezos quote, like, if intuition and data don't match, like, intuition's probably right, or I'm not saying it right, correctly, but it's don't ignore your intuition. Like, don't just blindly say, like, "Whoa, I guess the dashboard says this, so we're doing that." So that's another problem I've seen.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. I think it's interesting you talk about, the problem and really getting in love with the problem. And I think a lot of times you can experiment, unfortunately, just for the sake of experimentation if you're not going after a particular problem, which is then it becomes very difficult to actually say, like, we actually solved something, right? You'll have data, but did you actually solve anything? At that point, who knows? So I do appreciate that. Um, let's jump into a little bit around like you had mentioned, stakeholder management, in the sense of like trying to convince somebody you should or shouldn't do an experiment.
Mhm.
Let's just say you have a group of individuals, maybe it's your head of content or your head of, marketing or something like that. Um, they're very invested in what you're doing, right? And you say, hey, I'd like to run an experiment. And they say, come back and say, well, we really don't have time to do this, right? Our content experts really know what's best. So how do you go about managing that situation when you feel like, an experimentation exercise would actually be really beneficial instead of just going off of what they're telling you?
Yeah, I would hopefully be in a culture and environment where there is experimentation happening, but even if there's not, if that person's not exposed to it very much, I would think about both the benefits and the risks. I would think about, first of all, like, they might be right. Like, the thing they're trying to do might not be very risky. It might not be worth the time. So I wouldn't sort of shut my brain and be like, no, I need to convince you. Experiment. I'm right. You're wrong. But I would add, like, let's say they want to put a new landing page up on a website and link to it, and it's going to be, very visible. Maybe we're going to change the homepage to, to link to it, and the homepage maybe is the place that has a lot of traffic, and maybe will this new link will distract people, and it will drive down some other metrics like conversion or contacts or leads. I would try to highlight that risk. So, like, hey, and point to actually past experiments. Hey, we've done some things on the homepage in the past. We've put something else on the page, and it reduced our conversion rate, or, dropped our lead volume, whatever the metric is, by 10%, which is, let's imagine that's bad for that page. I would look to that. I would like, hey, like, we're talking about a risky area. And then I would also talk about the benefit and say, look, if we can run an experiment and show the experiment doesn't just give you a thumbs up, thumbs down. It can show you a magnitude of impact, and it can potentially even point to, if you instrument different things on the web page or the app, it can show you where people, where what behavior people are
Mhm.
having. Like, are they clicking more on something or less on something else, which can lead you, excuse me, to, oh, maybe a follow-on optimization and improvement, right? So that's the benefit, and then there's the risk. And I would use those two examples, hopefully with real world, real company, like, hey, these are examples of ways we've seen risk, ways we've seen benefit, to bring it back to this thing we want to do. Now, if that, say, marketing person's like, look, it's a web page. It's kind of over here. We're going to send traffic to it with email. It doesn't really hurt. I think it's reasonable to say, okay, maybe that in that case, well, we can just measure click through rate. We can just measure things. We don't have to worry about an experiment. But I would, assuming that's not the case, that's what I would do. Talk about the risks, talk about benefits.
Yeah, excellent. I think kind of goes back to your conversation around ROI, right? If the ROI is potentially very big or there's a lot of risk, right, then experimentation is more warranted. But if it's something small and not going to be a huge impact, then maybe you can just move forward. I totally agree. Um,
Right, right.
along that same line around like philosophy and how you go about doing it, what are some of the tools of the trade that you've used in the past or maybe that you use right now, right, to check your experiments? Like, do you use things like Mixpanel or Google Optimize or Amplitude or any of those types of tools? And tell me a little bit about how you've used them.
Yeah, where I work now, we have a lot of some homegrown tools, actually, for legacy
Mhm.
reasons, that let us set up experiments and feature flags and then call them. We also have our own instrumentation of our websites and our apps. We do, some part of where I work also uses Optimizely
Mm.
to do, some amount of cohorting as well. The concepts, though, are the same, right? You need a way to turn something on or off for a percentage of people, have a hopefully a non-biased set of cohorts, like a control and a variant. You need to measure impressions and clicks of different parts of the page or the app in each cohort, and then you need to have a calculator that, tells you, hey, variant increase or decrease, and hopefully, is that statistically significant? Does that have a p-value of, you know, zero point zero 0.05 or 95%, depending on what the measure is? And so those foundational pieces that I think most of these tools end up having, at least at its base.
Yeah, excellent. No, I appreciate that. Homegrown tools are usually very well done because they are typically customized exactly for what you're doing. So I do find a lot of value in that within the organization that we have. We have some tools that are homegrown and some that are not, and so I think that you'd feel right at home. All right, so let's jump into some more of the like practical application. Right, you talked a little bit about how you go about doing something, but I wanted to put together essentially a scenario for you, right? So based on the framework that you talked about in our last, few minutes here, I'd love to see how you put that into practice. So let's just imagine that you're a product manager for like a subscription-based streaming company, like a Netflix or a Disney Plus, something like that. And your key business objective is to really increase user retention. And so you have a hypothesis that a more personalized, recommended for you section on the homepage will really make users feel more understood and then therefore make them more likely to remain subscribed, right? So that's really your scenario. So how would you design an experiment to validate this hypothesis really from start to finish? And then we'll kind of dive into that a little bit more and hopefully we'll have all that covered through our time here together.
Yeah, got it. Well, first, I said it earlier, and I'll put it into practice here. Let's talk about user problems, right? I would imagine your scenario includes some problem or some opportunity where like there's not enough people. Like we believe there's a problem that people are not finding what they're looking for in this Netflix or Disney Plus type service. They don't feel like it's for them, and they're not coming back, maybe unsubscribing, whatever retention metric we have in mind. I would probably start there. I'm going to make some assumptions. I'm going to make an assumption that, hey, we've got a business problem and a user problem here. We believe our service should be bringing people back more. They should want to come back. They should want to consume more. And for whatever reason, we believe we're not where we should be. And that's affecting the subscriptions. That's affecting, let's call it that. It's affecting our subscription rate. Churn is high. We should be lower than it is. Um, then I would imagine the assumption that, oh, there's something about recommended for you that is sort of a place to create a hypothesis and test it, right? I would expect if and you can rewind me if you want, but my assumption here, if that would want to validate if it hasn't already been validated, is that there's a good number of people like something is up with recommended for you. Either a lot of people are seeing it and not using it, or it's we're not rolling it out very much, but of the people that see it, it's very popular, but it's only maybe showing up small number of times. So it's like, how do we make recommendations, personalized recommendations, more available to more users? But I think there needs to be some sort of like product problem now. It's sort
I
of
think
like
at
say,
this
well,
stage, I'll let you choose which one you want to go for, right? But you're on the right track.
yeah,
But I'll let you choose what kind
yeah.
of what metric you're looking.
Well, let's assume then that, I mean, let's the North Star metric is, let's call it, it could be a retained user, it could be subscription churn. Let's call it like a weekly active user or a daily active user, a retention metric. So we want people to sort of like who come back within that time period. And let's say the issue that we've seen with recommended for you is that now, did you say it was? Should I assume that it's part of the every user's experience? Does it matter? Should I define
Yeah,
that?
it's
Because I think
really every user's experience. We'll call it that.
okay. So let's assume we believe that recommended for you, if done well, will help people find and watch something that they love, hopefully. And let's imagine we've seen in our metrics that most people are not engaging with recommended for you. Maybe it's available on their screen, but they're not tapping on it, they're not opening it, they're not scrolling it, whatever that UI is. And so then I think that if those things are true, then I think the hypothesis then would be, if the quality of the recommendations are good, that's a big if the content is good, um, and it's something that people can find, then I'm actually jumping to like problem solving here, but like from a ground hypothesis statement, like, oh, if we got more people to engage with that section, we could improve that retention metric. So then the next question is why? Why is it not potentially uh, you know being used as much? And this is where I could make an assumption. Oh, the recommendations are bad quality. We need to improve them, or it's not very discoverable, or it's a UI. And for
So I think
purposes of
you
this conversation, I probably need to pick one, right?
Yeah, I think you've hit on a pretty good idea here, and I think I'm following along with what you're saying. Like even before designing the test, right? It seems like you're saying we need to figure out exactly what data we want to go look at, right? Like what is actually happening on that page? What are the engagement numbers? I think you mentioned, right? It's there,
That's
it's
right.
being shown X number of times, but the engagement might be low, or they're just not clicking on anything in particular with that. So, if I understand that correctly, that's how you would approach maybe the research side of things. So, I guess at the same time, right, you came up with a really great hypothesis, right, with the problem and then what the hypothesis might be if done well, with quotes, if done well, we think that the retention will go up, right? The customer retention will go up. So I guess the question is, past that now, how do you design that experiment, and like, what are your success metrics? How do you go about doing that, making sure that you have a well defined experiment?
Yeah. Well, I think it then boils down to what actual, thing are we going to change? Like, do we believe we have an opportunity to make the section called recommended for you more discoverable? Or do we think the opportunity is to make the recommendations better? Like, I think the research will point us to that. So I can assume, let's assume it's a recommendations issue. Like, it's recommended for you, pretty visible. It's on every first time load of the app or the website. Uh, but we believe that the recommendations, just looking at user clicks, maybe user conversations, maybe our own anecdotal usage, that sometimes the recommendations just don't feel very up to date, don't feel very relevant. And so then I would say, I would hypothesize, well, if we made the recommendations better, that people would engage. And then I would say there's probably recs are a hard, interesting, challenging, if it's an ML model or such to work on. But we can say, um, there's probably, perhaps the hypothesis is, there's if we had one additional piece of information we could uh, feed into the recommendation model, it would spit out better recommendations, which means more clicks into this section, which means more people finding things to view. So I can make up what one of those things are, but that it's a little bit ambiguous since we're not talking about a real service. But uh, let's imagine that's my let's oh, if we pass the recommendation model, um, information about, I don't know, how long you watched a particular show. Let's say that's missing. Oh, not just which show you watched, but how long you watch it. Did you bail after 1 minute, or did you bail kind of at the very end? That would be a stronger signal to feed better recommendations. So if that's my hypothesis, then I would want to have a way to test, some people to have recommendations with that input and some without. So people have two different sets. And then I would probably have a metric for that experiment that is focused on user behavior, right? I would love to know if, retention, like daily or weekly active users, or even subscription churn, if we want to go there, is affected. But I would first want to, I would want to bring it up and say, like, no, but that's an output metric. What's the input? The input is, are people clicking on recommended for you? Are people scrolling? Are people viewing? I would look at the actual engagement metrics within the UI that we are changing, and see if we are actually improving what we believe are signals that people are more engaged. That should correlate to more DAU or MAU or whatever. It should correlate to lower churn.
So now that
Okay.
we've thought through it, I do appreciate all of that. Kind of thought through it. You've built on your metrics, kind of what you'd be looking for. How do you go about building out what your MVP looks like with your engineering team and maybe your design team to say, we have this hypothesis. We think if we do this, we're going to get better metrics. How do you guys make sure that you keep that small, right, manageable, in order to run the experiment? Walk me through kind of really quickly what your thoughts are there and how you would actually accomplish that.
Yeah, I would. If that's so, my hypothesis is that we can improve Rex, and it's funny. This particular example has less of a UI component, has more of an engineering component. Um, I would. What often I coach my team on is, don't test too many things at once, because it makes the experiment, unclear. If you combine too many changes in one variant, what actually changed, what drove the change, or it slows you down. Like, it's like you can stack learnings more quickly versus doing one giant experiment. So the way I would guide my team, and the way I would think of it, is, what is the smallest and most valuable learning that we can have? Like, let's change. In this case, in my example, we're adding one input of data, and that we think will help. We're getting a new set of recommendations. Like, let's just focus on that. If it was a discoverability hypothesis instead, I would say, let's try one thing. Like, are we moving the panel up? Are we changing the number of shows in the strip, in the carousel? Are we changing the heading? Are we, like, what's the one thing? What's the biggest ROI thing we can do that we think will drive movement in the metric? And then by doing that, hopefully we stay focused and execute quickly. and we get enough of a signal, right? If we change something that we think won't make much of a difference, it might not show then in the results of the experiment. And so in this case, assuming that signal of, that how long somebody watched the show, it's a good signal. We're like, why did we not include this? We included in the model. We would hope that um, without, you know, changing 10 things about the model, that we could then have a pretty different experience for control and variant, which hopefully yields better results in the variant. So that's what I would look for. I would what I would maybe another way to answer the question is I would avoid things like, why don't we test 2 or 3 different signals in the ML model, George? I would be like, no, let's test one. Like, what's the most promising one? Or, oh, what if we do a UI test and an ML model change, recommendation engine change? No, let's keep those separate. That's usually the risk that I see is like they're like, oh, I have 10 ideas. It's like, let's test the most promising one, highest ROI one first, effort to what we think the return will be. Let's build on that. If that's a dud, we can take a different route, right? That's the way I would frame it for the
You
team.
think there would ever be a time where you would actually just want to have maybe a UI UX team create designs and show it to anybody before you implement? Is there a case for that in this case?
Yeah, depends how novel or how uncertain we are. In the case of, actually in the case of changing the recommendations engine, um, you could say that's more of engineering driven perhaps, but still you could imagine, I would want to at least see for my own self, right? Like, do these feel better? Like anecdotally, are we, because it's not worth running an experiment if you're way off, right? And similarly, I would say, like, if the problem were let's change some, or the hypothesis was let's change some copy, I would say that's low risk. If we're creating if we're making a much more dramatic change, I do think, spending the extra time to get user feedback is a way to de-risk, running an experiment only to realize like, oh, we were so far off the mark, we've wasted time engineering. So it's like it's cheaper to test it with a prototype with users than to have engineers build it and then ship it as an
Okay.
experiment. So
Yeah.
I would answer the question by saying, yeah, it kind of depends on uncertainty and risk again. Like if it's low risk, I would probably just go straight to testing the experiment.
Great answer. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Well, I noticed that we are getting close to time. I'm so excited that you were able to spend some time with us, walk through those questions. But I will definitely be in touch as we do our follow up. And we look forward to having you join our team.
Thanks, Chris. This was great. I appreciate your time.
Awesome. Well, take care. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Chris, you've got a ton of experience asking this question. What is important when it comes to this question?
I think to me, a lot of it's conviction. George mentioned this conviction for experimentation and why it's important because not every organization runs experiments or knows how to or even wants to. So he mentioned a little bit about culture and how culture, really facilitates that. But at the same time, if you're not convicted into doing experiments, then you're probably just going to run with whatever an expert says or just be an order taker. And as a product manager, it's really important that you're experiment minded, we'll call it.
Nice. Nice. Okay. Um, when you think about the data that you've seen out in the wild asking this question, what are some common mistakes that candidates make?
George did a really good job of not doing this. He almost stumbled into it, but you caught yourself. Is solutioning without even actually running the experiment, right? Is a lot of times people will, and product managers do this all the time, right? We love creating solutions, but we should love the problem more. So George really got into what's the problem? How would I design a solution, design a solution to create the experiment? So I think a lot of people want to jump in right away and talk more about the solution and how they would actually try to validate their solution more than just validate if there's a problem and what the outcome is. So they get a little too married to the outcome and not married enough to the problem.
Nice. Nice. What do you think were some things that you mentioned some things that George did well. If you were just thinking about George as a candidate, what were like the strongest moments that people could observe from this candidate?
Yeah, I think when he was really outlining his philosophy and thought process, that was really well done, really thought through. You can tell he has a lot of background, a lot of history doing it. He could talk off the cuff without really having to think through it much, as if it's just second nature. So that was really awesome. And I think that when given the opportunity to do a scenario, he dove right in. He didn't really have to think about, sit back and ask too many questions. I think when you're doing an interview, it's really important to say, like, I'm going to make some assumptions. You tell me if I'm headed in the right direction or not. Because most of the time your interviewer will be totally okay with whatever assumptions you make. But if you ask a lot of questions, it typically means that you're maybe lacking a little initiative or you're unsure of yourself. So it's better to do what George did, right? And just say, like, I'm going to make some assumptions. I'm going to move down this path. And I mean, that's what a good product manager does until they're proven otherwise, right? By the experiment. So
He took initiative in this round. He was driving the interview.
yeah, he really was. He was driving it, and he let me redirect if necessary, right? Or ask a couple questions just to make sure. But that's a great methodology, right? Am I on the right track? Here's how I would do it. That kind of idea.
One of the intuitive things that you noticed was what's a moment where he's like, this guy knows what he's talking about.
I think a lot of it what came when we talked about the scenario, how he didn't jump into immediate solutions, right? He framed what the problem was. He framed what metrics he would want to look at. And also, he gave some research points that he would want to understand ahead of time before he even designed anything. So you could tell, like, okay, George knows what he's doing, right? This is a good candidate. And then he then followed up with how he would then create, based on my question, how would you create the experiment, that kind of thing. But he started off really well, which means he already knows how to do it.
Yeah, I know. I was so impressed with you from the beginning. You had this kind of I don't know. I'm trying to pinpoint a moment for people. I want to dig a little bit deeper here, Chris, of like was there this happened some maybe this didn't happen. But sometimes in some interviews there will be a key phrase that a candidate says where the interviewer like, well, if they know about that, then they know a lot about this. What comes to mind when you think about experimentation and just the wealth of knowledge that George displayed? Were there any key words that made you say, that's a signal of really high skill here, a really deep experience here?
I mean, to be honest, it's right when he said that experiments, right? One of the key issues people do, or sorry, one of the problems they run into is they're not grounded on the problem. I actually wrote that down, right? And so to me, if you say you're not grounded on the problem and you could go out and experiment to just run experiments, right? In that case, you're wasting people's time, you're wasting resources and energy. He was really married to the problem. And I think that is when you notice, like, okay, George gets it. And now he's going to tell me how he would go about doing that, essentially.
Right. Awesome. Awesome. I guess I do want to ask George about just like, your approach on this because it went really well, but maybe for Chris, for what oftentimes if we just look at the scenario, you probably have like gates that you expect candidates to make it through or like, check marks you expect them to hit. Can you just kind of map out for people who maybe haven't done this interview, you as the interviewer, maybe peeling back the curtain, the kind of gates you expect people to move through on this problem?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things when we talk about a scenario is a non-behavioral question. It's not like tell me a time in the past. You're actually trying to let people think through it, right? And give me your frame of thought. Help me understand how you would approach it, because any plethora of problems might exist, but how would you do it, right? And what that solution might look like. So the first gate is defining the problem and the metrics around that. So George did a great job of kind of exploring what those metrics might look like. And when he said North Star, right, the North Star metric, weekly or daily active users and the retention there. Very clear, right? That he knows what he's looking for. And then he said, we're going to make some assumptions right away, which is every good product manager will make a set of assumptions. They will validate those along the way as well. And that could be, stakeholder interviews. He talked a lot about that, really kind of trying to boil it down to what it should do. And then a hypothesis, clear hypothesis. And in this case, he said if it's done well, meaning the recommendation section, it will retain the customer. So that then clearly shows that, like, okay, George knows what he's talking about. And he's going to move forward towards this experimentation that then helps us understand, is this, and he went through it very well, is this a UI problem or is it more of a
Mm,
like ML problem, right? So he broke it down even further past that. So each one of those are kind of gates or stages you would consider that, like, if they don't talk about those or don't talk about how they would approach those, then typically it means they don't understand, and probably somebody we would not want to have on the team, because you're not going to teach somebody at maybe George's level for this type of role. You don't want to teach them necessarily. You want them to hit the ground running and know what to do when they get there.
technically, he went beyond the prompt. Is that what
Yeah,
you expect of somebody above the senior level?
I would. Yeah, I would want to say that if they don't hit those baselines, then it's not going to work. When they show that they're senior level, and it really helps you understand, like, maybe you have even a couple of positions open, and I've seen this in the past where you interview knowing you have one or two positions open, and they could fit in either one, but based on their seniority level, you would say, okay, George is a great fit for this level because he clearly understands more than what I just asked him.
Nice. That's so cool. Really, really, really cool. George, I would love to hear just like what you thought of how you did, first of all. Like, yeah, if you would change anything, maybe, but just those two things.
I felt good, felt comfortable. Um, I don't know. It's hard to do in the moment, but maybe being a little bit more structured in the scenario, I think would be good. I think sometimes I tell PMs that I'm coaching to sort of milepost for the interviewer. Like, I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about that. And my tendency, maybe because of my experience, is just to kind of dive in and figure it out. Like, I know I have the rough outline in my head and I will get to the right things. I think, Chris, you, during the scenario, have asked, in a way, restated something I said, but also then clarified where I was in the process of doing so. I think it was the point of like going from the sort of setup of the problem, and the hypothesis to like, okay, what are you actually going to test and measure? And so that's one area I think I could have been a little more like I could hit, pause for a beat.
Hmm.
Say, I think I'll first talk about the user problem. I'll make some assumptions. Then I'm going to talk about, potential solutions and how we'll measure them and test them. Like that, I think would have made it a little stronger because it would have given Chris a sense of like, hey, what I'm about to say for the next few minutes, and in case I'm off with what he's looking for. And then he's also probably thinking about, great, like now I'm going to grade him on this, and maybe I have a follow up question I'm going to ask him. It just helps set expectations.
I think you
Yeah.
you hit on a really good point. Pausing just for a minute and even writing stuff down does show that you're really thinking through it, taking notes and stuff. And I know I have that tendency too. That I just want to jump in because I have a lot of experience as well. And so I think spending some time writing it down, thinking about it real quick, making your assumptions. I don't think any interviewer would ever be averse to that, right? They're really you're showing that you're taking the time. It also gives the interviewer just a little bit of a breather, right? To think, okay, what would my next follow up questions be? How do I want to structure my next thing? Because we are talking about this and you have led them down a path, right? Because your answers. So it does give them a second to just kind of breathe. So that's not a bad thing. You mentioned the pausing. That's pretty good.
Nice. Nice. With the wealth of experience that you have in experimentation, George, is there anything you think is an underrated tip when talking through these kind of rounds?
This type of question,
Maybe within experimentation as a domain, because this was a pretty kind of broad surface area, but it could be for the scenario particular part. Maybe that was the one that's a little bit more targeted. And maybe how you coach people on those kinds of rounds, or shedding some light on just how you approach it, because you did so.
Yeah.
We both loved it. Yeah.
Thank you. I like where Chris started the question because it is the thing that I think PMs sometimes miss, which is experimentation is a tool, but how do you use it, when you use it? I think that can, even if obviously you need to follow the interviewer's lead. Like if it's a technical, like an analytical type interview, you need to sort of get into those weeds. But if there's an opportunity to even just pose the question, well, I would first want to say, should we even run this experiment? And here's how I would answer that. Assuming the answer is yes, now let me dive really deep. That's good, but it shows that you have some higher level thinking. So I would say my feedback would be to folks tackling this kind of question is, don't forget about those higher level skills, especially if you have them. Demonstrate them, even if it is a deep like, what's the hypothesis? Let me show you a dashboard. How would you make the call? Like, let's dive deep into the data. Let's dive deep into this experiment setup. Like, even take a few moments to express the higher level, like, should we even run this experiment? Or how do I decide what in my roadmap I experiment? I think those are really good skills and they really kind of round out, I think, a candidate. It could be a tiebreaker between two candidates that are equally strong on the technical side.
Awesome. Awesome. Okay. Last question, Chris. What is your hiring decision for George?
I would love to have George on my team. I think it would be awesome. It would be a great mentor, I think, to other people, maybe junior level. So I'd love to have George. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thanks.